In 1814, as the War of 1812 raged, much of the attention was focused on the fierce battles along the Canadian border and on the high seas. But deep in the American heartland, a lesser-known but pivotal conflict was unfolding. This conflict took place along the upper Mississippi River, a vast, untamed wilderness that was also a vital economic artery and a strategic prize in the war. The river was the lifeblood of the lucrative fur trade and the scene of a power struggle between the burgeoning United States, the British Empire seeking to maintain its influence, and the various Native American nations fighting to protect their homelands and way of life. While major battles blazed elsewhere, the fight for control of the American heartland would be decided in the treacherous rapids of the Mississippi River at a place known as Rock Island. Here, the ambitions of a new nation would clash with the determined resistance of an ancient people, sparking a series of battles that would shape the destiny of the region and give rise to legends, both celebrated and forgotten. At the confluence of the Rock and Mississippi rivers lay Saukenuk, the capital of the Sauk Nation. This was not merely a village, but one of the largest Native American cities in North America at the time, with an estimated population of 4,800 in 1826. More than 100 large, bark-covered lodges were the center of social, spiritual, and economic life for thousands of Sauk people. Surrounded by fertile fields that stretched up to 2 miles to the north, Saukenuk produced abundant harvests of corn, beans, and squash, which sustained its people. For the Sauk, Saukenuk was sacred ground, the center of their universe. It was here that a revered war leader was born, Makatai Meshikiakiak, better known to history as Black Hawk. As a member of the Thunder Clan and the warrior class, Black Hawk's identity was forged by tradition and battle. "I am a Sauk, I am a warrior," he declared, a statement that encapsulated his entire life. However, the foundation of this Sauk world had been shaken a decade earlier. In the fraudulent Treaty of St. Louis in 1804, the United States claimed 50 million acres of Sauk and Meskwaki land, including Saukenuk itself. According to Black Hawk, the treaty was signed by a few individuals who had no authority from the tribal council, a betrayal that planted the seeds of deep grievance. This treaty became the primary cause of the Sauk's alliance with the British. For Black Hawk and his followers, the War of 1812 was not just a conflict between two white powers, it was an opportunity to undo the injustice of 1804 and reclaim their ancestral homeland. The British provided material support, but the spirit of Sauk resistance was born from a profound sense of loss and the desire to preserve their world. In the midst of a region dominated by British-allied tribes, the United States held one precarious foothold, Fort Selby at Prairie du Chien. Captured in June 1814, the fort served as an important trading post and military garrison, asserting the American claim to the territory. However, its remote location made it very vulnerable. Isolated deep within enemy territory, the garrison at Fort Shelby set out continuous, urgent requests for supplies and reinforcements as British and Native American forces began to gather to retake it. To reach this remote fort, the Americans relied heavily on the Mississippi River. The journey upriver was made using keel boats, vessels specifically designed for river warfare. These were not simple rafts, but fortified floating fortresses equipped with protective walls and light armament to withstand attacks from the riverbanks. These boats were the lifeline for Fort Selby and also the primary target for those who wished to drive the Americans from the upper Mississippi. The mission to reinforce this besieged garrison would trigger the first battle at the Rock Island Rapids. In response to the desperate calls for help from Fort Selby, a relief expedition was organized in St. Louis. Command was given to Lieutenant John Campbell of the 1st U.S. Infantry. His force consisted of 3 keelboats carrying about 120 regular soldiers and rangers, along with some civilian contractors and a few women and children. Their mission was clear but perilous: sail upriver through enemy territory to deliver vital supplies to the besieged garrison. The journey began quietly. According to Black Hawk's account, his forces even met with Campbell's expedition the night before the battle. In that meeting, Black Hawk assured Campbell that the river would remain open for American travel,
a ruse that successfully lulled the Americans into a false sense of security. On July 19th, fate turned against the American expedition. A severe storm struck the river, and strong winds forced Campbell's lead keelboat, heavily laden with supplies, ashore on an island that would later be known as Campbell's Island. In the midst of the storm, Campbell made the fatal decision to make camp on the island, likely underestimating the threat lurking in the surrounding woods. For Black Hawk, this was an opportunity provided by nature. Leading a force of 400 warriors, a combination of Sauk, Meskwaki, and Kickapoo, he launched a fierce surprise attack. The American sentries were killed instantly. From behind the dense trees on the riverbank, the warriors unleashed a deadly fire on the stranded boat and the bewildered soldiers. Chaos engulfed the American forces. Lieutenant Campbell was severely wounded early in the fight. The other two boats, commanded by Lieutenant Stephen Rector and Lieutenant Jonathan Riggs, fought desperately against the strong current and heavy fire to rescue the survivors from the besieged keelboat. Rector's boat became so laden with the wounded that he was forced to throw most of his supplies into the river to keep from sinking. The retreat was a desperate panic. The expedition was a complete failure. 16 Americans were killed and dozens more were wounded. For Black Hawk and his warriors, it was an absolute victory. They paraded and scalped the fallen soldiers who were left behind, a sign of total victory in their tradition. Campbell's defeat was the result of a perfect storm, both literally and figuratively. The extreme weather created the opportunity, while American negligence and the brilliant ambush tactics of the Native American warriors ensured disaster for the relief expedition. The crushing defeat of Lieutenant Campbell at Campbell's Island sent a shockwave through St. Louis. It was clear that a much stronger response was needed to punish the Sauk and reassert American dominance on the upper Mississippi. This task fell to a tough and experienced career officer in frontier warfare, a man who would one day become President of the United States, Major Zachary Taylor. Major Zachary Taylor was no ordinary officer. Known as Old Rough and Ready by his men, he was a veteran who had honed his skills in various conflicts against native tribes. His presence signaled the seriousness of the American response. His mission was not just to provide relief, but to exact retribution, to destroy the Sauk villages and break their resistance once and for all. Taylor led a much more formidable force than Campbell had. His expedition consisted of 8 armed boats carrying 334 regular soldiers and militia. This was a force designed for battle, not just a supply convoy. Meanwhile, the victory at Campbell's Island had strengthened the alliance between the Sauk and the British. At Rock Island, Black Hawk now commanded a much larger force, estimated at 1,200 warriors from various tribes, including the Sauk, Sioux, and Winnebago. More importantly, they now had direct British support. Lieutenant Duncan Graham of the British Royal Artillery, a former fur trader with extensive experience in the region, arrived with a small detachment of 30 men. Though small in number, Graham brought a game-changing element, a 3-pounder cannon and 2 small swivel guns. The alliance was now a formidable combined force, blending the battlefield knowledge of the native warriors with the technological power of British artillery. History seemed to repeat itself, but with a more decisive outcome. As Taylor's fleet approached the Rock River on September 4th, another fierce storm struck, forcing his boats to take shelter and anchor near Pelican Island, now known as Willow Island, just across from Credit Island. On dawn, September 5th, the battle began. Sauk warriors under Black Hawk crossed from Credit Island to Pelican Island and attacked, killing an American sentry. Taylor's forces managed to push them back from the small island, but as they were consolidating, the decisive element of the battle came into play. On the west bank of the Mississippi, Lieutenant Graham and his men had positioned their artillery. Their cannon fire rained down on Taylor's anchored boats. The keelboats, designed to withstand rifle fire, proved vulnerable to cannonballs. The damage was severe. One report claimed that 51 of 54 cannon shots hit their targets. Taylor, shocked by the presence of artillery, described the attack as a sea of native warriors as far as the eye could see. Pinned down by devastating artillery fire and facing an overwhelming number of enemies, his position became untenable. The British artillery had turned an ambush into a combined arms battle that the American riverine force could not win. With no other option, Major Zachary Taylor ordered a retreat. His expedition, like Campbell's, ended in a crushing defeat, with 3 men killed and 14 wounded. Retreating downriver, Major Zachary Taylor was faced with a dilemma. He could not advance, but returning to St. Louis empty-handed after a humiliating defeat was an embarrassing option. As a last resort, he established Fort Johnson on a bluff overlooking the river near present-day Warsaw, Illinois. From Black Hawk's perspective, the construction of this fort was a direct violation of Sauk sovereignty. "I did not want a fort in our country," he wrote. "It would prevent us from going there to hunt." His statement underscores the core of the conflict, the struggle for land and resources. However, Fort Johnson was short-lived. Unable to be supplied during the coming winter, the fort was abandoned and burned after less than 2 months.
This act became a symbol of the complete failure of the American campaign to control the upper Mississippi in 1814. Today, thanks to the work of archaeologists, the locations of Fort Johnson and the later-built Cantonment Davis have been discovered. Artifacts unearthed from the site, military buttons, flints, and musket balls, provide a tangible link to the historical narrative, bringing the brief existence of this frontier fort back to life. For the United States, the defeats forced them to abandon the upper Mississippi for the remainder of the war, a significant strategic setback. However, the experience did not damage Zachary Taylor's career. He would go on to achieve fame in the Mexican-American War and was eventually elected president. The Americans would return in 1816 to build the formidable Fort Armstrong on Rock Island, a clear acknowledgement of the island's strategic importance, learned the hard way. For Black Hawk and the Sauk Nation, the victories of 1814 were a moment of triumph. The victories validated his leadership and proved the value of the alliance with the British. This success would greatly influence his decision-making 2 decades later, when he once again attempted to resist American expansion, leading to the tragic Black Hawk War of 1832. For the British, the victories strengthened their alliances with the tribes in the region and secured their western flank in the western theater of the war until the end of the conflict. Today, a granite monument stands on Campbell's Island, and a simple stone marker marks the site on Credit Island. These places commemorate what some historians have called a forgotten battle. But its impact was very real. It was a clash of empires and cultures, a fight to defend a homeland, and the proving ground for a future president and a legendary Native American leader. The story of this battle, preserved in historical records and rediscovered by archaeologists, reminds us that history is not only found in books, but is also buried in the ground beneath our feet. The echoes of these battles, for sovereignty, for homeland, for control, still resonate along the rapids of the Mississippi River.